It's time to take a new approach to finding true fulfillment in your career, health, and state of mind through insightful conversations with those who have found their professional and personal passions while achieving balance. Whether it's entrepreneurs, athletes, or healthcare professionals, we bring you real people, real growth right here on the Boost Podcast. Now, here's your host, Elena Lipson.
Hey Boost Squad, and welcome to episode 20. Elena Lipson here, and I am psyched to introduce today's featured guest, Stephan Sherman. Stephan, are you ready to join the Boost Squad?
Yes, I am, and I'm really nervous.
Oh, don't be.
So before we dive into today's episode, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Mosaic Growth Partners. Mosaic Growth Partners provides growth strategy consulting to entrepreneurs and organizations in the healthcare and older adult baby boomer market. They can help you bring a new product or service to market, identify and engage new customers and partners, or grow your market share. They also provide coaching and training. For more information, go to mosaicgrowth.com. That's mosaicgrowth.com. Now back to today's featured guest.
Stephan is the founder and creative chief officer of Super Evil Megacorp, which is a gaming and eSports developer. The company's first title, Vainglory, quickly rose to become the world's largest mobile eSport after its global launch in early 2015. In less than a year, Vainglory has held live competitive gaming events around the world, and it's received numerous accolades, including Apple's Best Apps in 2014 and 2015, the Apple Design Award at Worldwide Developers Conference, the IMGA's Best Technical Achievement and People's Choice Awards, and the Tabby Award for Best iPad Game. The company has also raised more than $40 million in funding and is based in San Mateo, California. Prior to founding Super Evil Megacorp and running its creative design and programming, Stephan worked as an engineer and programmer for the last 15 years at companies including Riot Games, Slipgate Ironworks, and Gazillion Entertainment. So we have so much to get into with you here today, Stephan. So let's just get started. What are the three things that we should know about Super Evil Megacorp?
Well, first, Super Evil Megacorp is a studio that makes right now a mobile game, but is not a mobile game studio. We focus on video games in general, and we're lucky enough to have our own technology, a technology platform that allows us to create video games on nearly anything, from an iPhone to a PS4 to, an Oculus Rift, anything that could come out in the future. And because of that, we're really lucky, so we can try and jump into markets that we think are going to be hot and exciting. It just so happened that the first market we wanted to sort of turn our eyes at was mobile. And we started Vainglory, which so far seems to be going really well. That's the first thing. Let's see. The second thing that you should know about Super Evil Megacorp, we're not particularly large, and we don't really want to be. As far as starting companies go, company growth is its own topic and its own black art that I'm not necessarily claiming that I've mastered, but we knew early on that we were looking to be more like the Navy SEALs than to try to be like the Army. If you end up hiring up people too quickly, then your company burn rate goes through the roof and you very rapidly burn through all of the startup fund that you get from an investor. The number one reason most startups fail is running out of money. It's not having a bad idea. It's not because they failed their product launch or anything else. It is that they literally just ran out of cash. So managing that money was really important to us once we got our seed fund. And so we have kept the team as tight and as talented as we can possibly make it. And that allowed us to execute. And third about Super Evil Megacorp is that while our name sounds like we're really evil, it's much more the Despicable Me kind of evil, because we thought it would be really funny and charming, and we wanted to see the press releases when big companies had to announce that they had invested in Super Evil Megacorp. But ironically, we are quite the opposite, and we believe in a sense of integrity within the games industry, which is to say, try to provide games that we think leverage entertainment and fun more than games that just leverage addiction mechanics that can often be toxic or can feel like you're fleecing your audience.
Great. Lots of good stuff to follow up on there. So it sounds like you've been really careful about how you've set the company up and how you've determined what your growth strategy is going to be. It's interesting to hear you say that you're not trying to grow to be really big. I think a lot of startups out there, their dream is to get really big and scale to a certain extent and have a major exit. So that's a really interesting point that I just wanted to comment on. The other that I really thought was interesting is you created this brand Super Evil Megacorp that is, I mean, it's just kind of funny. It reminds me of like Dr. Evil from Austin Powers, but it's great because you have all this, people really like look at that name and they remember it when they see it in the press or something. And I think it's funny when you describe how you guys are really not a bunch of evil guys. You're actually trying to do something good and move away from how a lot of video games become addictive and they kind of lose some of the fun element because they're literally just like creating something the audience is craving and then they're spending all their time on video games. So I just thought that was really interesting. And
It's actually worked really well too with the Super Evil Megacorp name because so many times other companies have to do a double take and ask, is that really our name? So often companies attempt to get as far away from feeling like they would be evil for any reason. And so for us to have just stepped in with both feet and kind of embraced it takes a lot of people aback, but also creates a certain sense of charm that I think a lot of people have responded to.
absolutely. And for those who don't know, Stefan's email is actually Captain Nito. So they all have a lot of fun with what they're doing there, and they have a lot of sort of nicknames for each other. So I don't think they take themselves too seriously, which is always important.
No.
So I really don't know anything about gaming. I don't think I've really played video games since I had like the first Nintendo console back in the day. So educate me and the rest of us a little bit about when you look at gaming and particularly mobile gaming, what do you see now and in the future?
So it's okay if you don't play games, and a lot of people don't. It's a really large industry, but it's also a very inward and almost old boy kind of industry where people that are into gaming have been into gaming for years and years and years and years, and people that are outside of it just never really see the point, which is totally okay. So the quick explanation on what's happening right now in gaming is you can sort of divide video games into two big giant buckets. The first is we'll call firecrackers, and the second I'll call bonsai trees. And I'm sort of making this up as I go along, but work with me for a moment. Firecrackers are the kinds of video games that you might see television commercials for. If you have a friend or a family member or a husband or wife that is super into gaming, they may have a PlayStation or they may have an Xbox. And generally these are consoles that are right in the living room attached to the television. And games that are made for those consoles are what I call firecrackers because they operate very similarly to movies. The way a game works is it will have a release date, just like a movie would, and they make the majority of their money on that video game within the first 2 to 4 weeks of the game's release, just like a movie would. What this means is you have to do a lot of advertising in order to get return on investment, just like movies do. And that means that upfront advertising means you have to have really deep pockets. Now, typically in the game industry, that the people that provide the money and the people that make the video game are two separate companies that will tend to work together. The company that provides the money is known as a publisher, and they're responsible for getting the game into Target and Walmart and Best Buy. And then the person that actually made the game was called the developer. And they're responsible for actually making something and hopefully something that's fun. The developer gives the game away to the publisher, and they see very little about any monetary effect from the game after they're done. They were paid to make the game by the publisher, but the publisher turns around and sells it to the audience and to your husband or wife or your kids. And hopefully they make more money selling it through Best Buy and Target than they did in paying the developer to actually make the video game. Now, in order for them to do that, they have to advertise a lot. And so they have to put up millions and millions of dollars to try and get it on television and in the Super Bowl and whatever, and try and get people to come out in that first weekend and buy the video game. And then their money from that video game drops off dramatically. That model is a model that Super Evil has looked to avoid, specifically because in that model, the developer gives away a lot of the intellectual property and a lot of the benefit of creating that game to the publisher. And yes, they get paid, but they get paid only to create the game, which is basically a working salary. If your game is a smash hit and makes a jillion dollars, you see pretty much zero of that, and the publisher is just quite happy. So we were looking for a model in which our successes or our failures were directly linked to whether our company thrived or died, because it just felt fair. It felt democratic. It felt capitalist. It felt like the right thing to do, rather than giving away the best of your talent to another company to sell for you. So We went for the second category of games, which I'm calling bonsai trees. Firecrackers, they sparkle, they fizzle really quickly, and hopefully they make a lot of money in a short amount of time. Bonsai tree games are supposed to be around for a very long time, and they grow, sort of like rolling a snowball downhill. Now, the way these games work is that they operate on a different kind of model. The way that players play these kinds of games is that they play them for tiny short sessions for many, many months, rather than what you do when you play on a PlayStation or an Xbox, where you might play for like 8 hours. Most of those games are 8 to 20 hours of gameplay, and then the game is over. So instead, we make games that are thousands of hours long. And you play the game for months and months and months and hopefully enjoy your time with it. And because of that, you tell your friends and they tell their friends, and then it slowly builds an audience over time. And the game doesn't die out. It has a very long tail. It'll live for a very long time. Vainglory has been around for 2 years and is still gaining momentum. And like a bonsai tree, we spend a lot of our time cultivating Vainglory. That means adding to its audience, trying to grow it, making sure people hear about it, and figuring out how to ever expand into new markets and territories. The future of gaming is likely going to tilt that direction anyway, for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can never separate from the game industry the business side, and unfortunately, it makes much more money. The bonsai tree games will make orders of magnitude more cash than the firecracker styles of game. The firecracker style of games with your PlayStations and Xboxes will still be around because it's a healthy market, but it will not see the kinds of revenue anywhere close. And I mean, we're talking orders of magnitude in difference that you would see from these kinds of games that are on your cell phone or on your iPad. So in the future, that will grow. And if you're looking at how big business has moved around the game industry, for example, a company that I admire called Supercell, they make a game called Clash of Clans. You may have heard of it. It's on many people's cell phones. It's a tiny little game where you control an army in a town. And it's a bonsai tree. It's a game that you play for many, many months. And it's one of the most successful games in the world. And they were recently purchased by Tencent last year, I believe. It may have been the year before, but they were recently purchased for $8.6 billion. Now, this company is a company of about 120 people, and they were just sold to a very large company for a very large sum of money. And that just shows you the valuation of the company, which doesn't tell you the profit of the product they were making. In general, that means the profit of the product had to be significantly bigger than the amount that company was sold for. So in terms of the amount of cash behind bonsai trees or firecrackers, bonsai trees will eventually win. What we hope to do is we just hope Super Evil is in the right place at the right time to make exciting products for players that reflect the kind of values and the enjoyments that we think are most important to put in front of players. We're not in the game industry to make money, but we need to make money to make games. And so we try to balance both things in a way that feels very honest and sincere to our audience and allows us to continue to do what we love.
Great. Thank you for that description. That was so helpful. I didn't know any of that stuff before, and those analogies really help. So what I want to know is, you mentioned the firecrackers and the bonsai trees. What's kind of the division of the percentage of companies that fall in each bucket right now?
So back in the day, it was all firecrackers, and they called the firecracker style of gaming was called third-party developer model. It's where, one studio hires another studio to make a game for them, and then they turn around and sell it for hopefully much more money. That environment has a lot of problems with it, and it also has a very high barrier for entry. So a lot of studios either no longer are capable of making games that are firecrackers and being able to reach the audience that they would need to stay profitable and stay alive, or they just feel like they can control their own destiny far easier by going the bonsai tree route. In general, I think that that's what will move companies that direction. And in the past, that's why we've seen a rise in game studios that make more of the bonsai trees than the firecrackers. And now I'm not sure the proportion, but I think the tilt is definitely towards bonsai trees. If I were to be putting money on it, I would say bonsai trees.
Very interesting. So one of the things that Stephan is bringing up is something that I talk to my clients a lot about, and it's the idea that sometimes you need to slow down in order to speed up faster over the long term. So if you look at this bonsai tree model, they're not making all of their money in the first 2 to 4 weeks after a game is released, but over time, because they slowed down and did things a little bit differently, and maybe we're not looking for that short-term growth as much as keeping their eye on the prize later down the line, they're able to really earn a lot more profits and a bigger engaged audience over the long term. And that's something that I see successful companies doing over and over again. Those ones that are just in it for the quick hits and the quick wins, it's really hard to sustain that over time. And so that could also be why maybe this bonsai model is sort of picking up momentum over time.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it helped for us to play to our strengths because we felt that we would be able to do a much better job cultivating a product in the long term than we would be able to just create a lot of rapid fire, tiny little firecrackers that we throw over the wall and hope that something strikes gold. I never really wanted to go into business just to attempt to see if we could make a lottery ticket hit. We may, and in the future we might have a game that is just like it makes $1 jillion and just happens to be one of those overnight successes. But Vainglory is as close as you can get to that kind of model when you're actually investing in the product instead. And I felt that it would much more benefit our company to exercise that kind of quality and talent than to just try and see if we could roll the dice a few times and get rich quick.
Yep. So you told us a little bit about the model for your business and that you're not looking for a huge team to help you grow and that you're in this for the long haul. But can you give us 3 specific tactics for how you've grown your business from where you first started until where you are today?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. So for the people that are listening, I am not a business dude. Like I did not go to business school or business college or whatever it's called. I am a programmer. That's what I did. I started this company with my buddy and he was also a programmer, so neither of us have any idea of really what we're doing, and a lot of what we ended up discovering we learned as we were going through the experiences. We were building the plane while we were flying the plane. It was a very intense experience. That said, there were some things that I discovered that I had misconceptions about that has helped in our strategies on how we've grown our business. So first, no company expands alone. There is almost always 100% of the time, and definitely in the game industry, there are partnerships that you have to forge with other companies in which you will need their help in order for you to be able to gain users. Nothing is free. Everything costs you something. So for example, in the game industry, we have conversations with a lot of companies that we partner with that they may have access to a large audience, but they want to be able to put something exciting in front of the audience to keep their attention. We represent that excitement. They represent an audience that we want to play our game. And so you find these mutually beneficial scenarios in which working with that company will help profit it. Sometimes they're not mutually beneficial, and you either have to eat the cost by ponying up some money, or the company is coming to you because they want something from you and the benefit to you is nearly as great, and so they may supplement it with a small amount of money. But either way, you're constantly managing and developing relationships with other businesses. If you get into at least the game industry with the expectation that you can go it alone, you will not succeed. I know of only one product in the history of the game industry that has ever succeeded that way, and it's incredibly rare. The second tactic for growing the business, we had to learn how to master what they call user acquisition. In the game industry, that they shortened that to an acronym, UA. And UA is the process of how do you get people to use your product. For video games, it's how do you get people to play your game. There's a lot of ways you can guess. Like you could put an advertisement on television, or you could run an advertisement on a website. But in all of those things, it's not enough to just do it. You also have to measure how successful it was, because you're sinking money into doing that thing. And if it turns out to not be getting you the users you want, it's a really bad idea to continue to sink money into it. So UA wasn't just coming up with ideas of how to grow the business. It was also measure your user acquisition as you're going. You have to know how effective specific channels are, because if you don't have an effective channel, you should stop spending money on it. Again, most startups they fail for running out of money. And if you can find any way to keep the money or the value in your pocket for longer, it's always a benefit. The third tactic that we had for growing our business was that we attempted to engage directly with our user base. And a lot of that is grassroots, boots on the ground, talking to people, figure out why they love the product you've created, and try and use the reasons they tell you to spin your own advertising to create a marketing message that you think will reach more people like them. The key is if somebody has already engaged your product and they're passionate about it, they're like, oh my goodness, this thing is the best thing since sliced bread. Figure out why they think it's sliced bread. Even if you think it's sliced bread, it doesn't matter what you think. It matters what they think. And then when you hear back from them what they think makes it the sliciest bread they've ever had, then you take that message and you reinvigorate it into an advertising campaign that will hopefully attract other people like them. And from there, you can hopefully grow.
That's great. So those 3 tactics that you talk about are pretty universal for any business. This idea of having partners so you can grow and scale faster and complement some of the existing resources you have in-house with the ones that you might not have, figuring out how to acquire users, and then figuring out how to engage them and speak to them in their language and to their problems. So the one that I want to dive into a tiny bit more is this idea of partnerships. So partnerships can be really tough. What are some of the things that you look for when you are trying to evaluate if somebody's a good partner?
What we specifically start off with is making sure that we understand specifically what value and what needs for your own company that this partnership is going to provide, because you will likely be giving up something. Like, nothing comes for free. And so while you know that you're going to have to pay in some manner, it's not always money. It may be time, resources, focus, attention, 1,000 things. But while you're always going to have to pay for that partnership, you want to make sure that whatever you're getting from that is directly impacting your business and moving it forward. If it's not, if it's just a cosmetic, if it's just icing on the cake, if it's unnecessary, it's worth considering not taking on the distraction. So for us, like, there were a lot of partners that have reached out to us that had very exciting opportunities that we thought were amazing to hear about, but didn't directly impact the growth vectors that we were using for trying to grow Vainglory. And so when talking to them, it was almost a little bit of a wistful, sorry, we have to turn it down, but we had to turn down many partnerships that just weren't going to take us in the direction that was going to cultivate the product long term. And again, we're growing a bonsai tree, so we have to figure out exactly what we want to feed it. The partnerships that we did take on board, working within those partnerships is often very dicey as well. Sometimes the partnerships happen very organically and elegantly. Sometimes neither side is quite sure where their responsibilities begin and where their responsibilities end. And a lot of that terminology is going to come down to the language in that agreement, but you have to be really clear what you're asking the other business to do. Because if it's not in the paperwork, they have no obligation whatsoever to do it, even after they have gotten whatever they wanted from you in that partnership. If you're a small startup, the best you can hope for is to protect your cash and your time. You don't have a lot of people, you don't have a lot of cash. Whatever that partnership might be, you may not want to make the costs around those two specific resources. We tried our best to avoid that as well, and it worked out for us because we're a tiny team. And that allowed us to focus on the things that we needed to focus on. So a lot of our partnerships early on was about getting distractions out of our way, and we were willing to give up some things for it. But as long as you quantify what it is that you're getting from it, then I think that it will end up being a useful and a beneficial partnership on both sides.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about some opportunities being distractions is very, very important. So I know in my business, people reach out all the time and say, "Oh, I think we can work together on this or that." And while that's flattering and it's exciting to think that, people are interested in working with you, if you entertain too many of those ideas, you'll spend all your time chasing those partnerships.
Yes.
And so that's where partnerships can actually become a distraction. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Why don't we shift gears a little bit and tell us about a time when you've stagnated or stopped making progress along this journey?
It's interesting. There's been a couple of moments. We made Vainglory. We ended up getting a seed round to fund Super Evil. And using that seed round, we hired up a couple of incredibly talented dudes. We all locked ourselves in a room and we started working on this video game. And there were moments in working on the video game where the first stagnation we experienced was bringing the game itself to market. Because this weird thing happens. You kind of start cultivating this thing, and then you have so many hopes and dreams that are tied up in it that it's difficult for you to translate the potential of what it could be into the actual of what it is. Because in your mind, this product is amazing. And once people get their hands on it, they're not going to play anything else for the rest of their lives because, oh my God, this game is the end of all games. But it's not. And so at some point, you actually have to give it to users and take critical feedback about what successes and failures you've had. And you get cold feet when you're approaching market. It actually helped us a little bit because we had competition in this space. Our first point of stagnation was we were trying to make the perfect game, right? Sort of the great American novel version of a video game. And then we realized while we had was good enough to be able to throw over the wall and make a lot of people happy. And there were other companies that knew that and were going to take our space from us. And that really lit the fire under our butts. That was the end of our first stagnation period. We also had another stagnation period where we hadn't figured out how to do UA. Again, that's the user acquisition. We didn't know how to make that work. So we were still struggling to figure out, like, okay, which ones should we take, or how should we approach it? And we went back and forth and back and forth. Some of the things that helped with that is we were lucky enough to have had grown really nice and solid partnerships with other companies, specifically Apple. And Apple was looking for a company to put on stage for the iPhone 6 launch event. And they reached out to us and they were like, "Hey, if you guys want to try out, we have a short list of companies that we're talking to. You guys are on the short list, and if you wow us, then you guys can be on stage with us." And we were. It was myself and Tommy, and we presented in front of the world. And many of our first users were people that wrote to us and said that they saw us on the stage at the iPhone 6 event, and that was the tipping point for them that made them want to try out our game. So that opportunity grew organically from having made relationships with companies and gained their respect. So I would urge, even if you go into partnerships with other companies, always do your best to have those partnerships end beneficially for them as well as you, because they will want to work with you again. And if they want to work with you again, you can continue to grow your business. You can always just take whatever you get from them and run. But again, it almost hurts you nothing to make sure that they are just as happy as you are.
Yeah, great point. I like also what you said basically about don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. So I see this happen sometimes with startups, and it's really just heartbreaking to watch that they try to make sure everything about their solution is exactly how they want it to be and perfect. And meanwhile, the market is continuing to move. And so then by then someone's already beaten them to the punch. They've lost their first mover advantage, or the market's already changed and now no one needs that solution, which is
Yep.
a very real thing in some of these high tech sectors where the pace of innovation and product development is happening so quickly. So I'm glad you brought that point up. One of the last things I want to ask you, so I'm just picturing, a programmer working like 20 hours a day in a room by themselves. I imagine it's not quite like that, but you're putting in a lot of hours. And so how do you take time for yourself when you're growing this business in the way that, someone takes care of a bonsai tree, which is very carefully and very slowly?
Yeah. Early on, it's hard. The first couple of months, when it was just myself and Tommy, we were working out of his kitchen. We had two MacBook Pros, and we would wake up every day at 8 a.m. and we would start programming, and we would do that until midnight, and we would do that 7 days a week. A lot of that fire was because we had quit our jobs to do it, and we had a savings account, and every day you're watching it go down a little, and you still haven't figured out how quite to make the whole thing click. And I think for a lot of new entrepreneurs, that part is scary. It is scary to build up some savings and then start burning through it to try and do something. But what I encourage people to keep in mind with these kinds of investments is, even though it seems like it's a lot of money that you're burning through with those kinds of savings, it's really not. If you give yourself a runway of about one annual work year to be able to pull off something worthwhile, you're basically looking at, they call this the rent and bread salary. If you save up enough for your own rent and bread salary, in the Bay Area, you could easily do it for, easily is in air quotes, you could do it for about $60,000. And again, that's not all that you have to have at the start. If you have about maybe a third of that amount to be able to set aside, you will be able to accrue some more as you're going along because you end up picking up odd jobs. There were small tasks that we would do for other companies. We would hire ourselves as independent contractors for a while just to sort of top up the business account, and you can continue to work on the thing that you love. Having that pressure of watching your savings slowly going down day by day is a very good incentive to make sure that you're focused. Everyone's human. You will get distracted, you will get tired, or you may not want to do it. But once you feel that investment, you will have a much higher chance of actually pulling it off, because it, like forcing yourself to go to the gym, being there will force you to kind of just be like, oh, dang, I'm going to have to do it. And you'll do it. That was the first thing. I had very little work-life balance. But the next thing was I brought family and friends into that environment far more than tried to exclude them from it. There was no way for me to have an easy work life balance. So what I did was, my significant other, whenever she was off, that she would come to work with us. and she would hang out with us, and we would all eat together, and it became a family affair. It became a giant a giant rolling family of everybody's significant others are constantly just coming through, and everybody's cooking dinner for each other, and it's a very weird dorm life that kind of emerges because everybody's constantly working but constantly spending the time with other people. There was a scene in the Facebook movie where they had all moved into this giant house in Palo Alto. And there are a lot of startups that do this where they just rent a home and all of the founders just live in the home in a different bedroom with all their families. And you just take 100% of your time and you try and start up your family. Whatever works for you, you have to find a way to bring your outside life in. And now, after the business got rolling, there was a lot of conversation, and especially once you start getting investors, they do encourage you to take a breath. The interesting thing is, I assumed that once we had investors, they were going to be cracking the whip and be like, oh my goodness, get that product to market, blah, blah, blah. And they will. But their other side of things is that they also are investing as much in you as they are in your idea. A lot of startups change ideas, a lot of startups. The number of startups that start and go to market with the product that they pitched is easily the exact same amount as do not go to market with that same product and find something completely different to take to market. So what investors are typically looking for are people that they think have the qualities to be able to stick through several ideas, not just one. And because of that, they also really don't want to burn you out. You are to them a resource that they have put money into, and they want to cultivate you as much as your business or your product. So the moment that we had our seed round and once our business started growing a little, the investor was like, okay, you know what? Take a breath. Take a breath. You can take the weekend, go off with your kids, go off with your wife, go off with whomever, and just relax a little bit. And from there, striking that work and life balance becomes a lot more manageable. And we've been okay since then, somewhat. It's still
Well,
busy.
great.
It's still really busy, but somewhat.
Yeah, well, that trajectory of kind of the different stages of where you were at and how your work-life balance emerged over time is pretty interesting. And I think that kind of plays to the point that how hard it is to have work-life balance when you're starting out. But it sounds like you at least tried to see your friends and family by integrating them into the company family and making
Yes.
time for them.
Yes, we did okay.
So let's go ahead and close out with a parting piece of guidance for us, Stephan.
I think the most important thing that I could tell people every time I get the opportunity is give it a try, because it is never a bad experience. I have never met a person that attempted it that was sad for it. Some of them, it didn't work out, or the company didn't go the direction that they wanted to, or they lost some money in the process. But all of them, even if that brief experience didn't turn out what they wanted, they go right back into the industry and they find they are far more valuable for the experiences that they had. And they know so much more going back into their industries if they decide to take another job than what they had before, that they don't feel as if it was like a detriment. It is not going to torpedo your life. It's a little bit hard, but it's not that hard. Like it's not so hard that it is a complete deterrent. I always think people should be trying to start businesses more. If you feel you have that passion, I would encourage you to, read around online. There's a guy, I think his name is Graham. Oh, geez, I forgot his first name. Graham. He started a company called Y Combinator. If you Google for Graham Y Combinator and his blog, he's got great motivational essays that you can read about how to start startups and really how beneficial it is. Because the moment you get your first seed round, you are getting a salary again, and everything comes back into sway. And now you have a huge opportunity to be able to make your own mark. And so, yeah, I would say always, if you feel you have a slight inkling like you could be that guy, do it. There are people in the industry that have done it that are much dumber than you, much dumber. You can do it. Trust me.
Great. Good stuff. I agree. Everyone should give it a try if they have that passion. So I hope today's episode inspires you to think more about how you can find your passion and live your best life. For more information, including links to resources that Stephan and I chatted about today and how best to get in touch with him, head on over to our website, theboostpodcast.com, and check out our show notes from this episode and catch the Boost bonus. Stephan, I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us today. And remember, anything is possible for you.
Now that you've completed this episode, the next step is to join the Boost Squad for strategic insights, tips, and tricks, as well as exclusive resources designed specifically to accelerate your personal and professional growth. All this and more is waiting for you at theboostpodcast.com.